So I've been in workshops where people have said to me, other participants have said to me, well, why don't you write about, growing up in Sri Lanka? And I thought, because I didn't grow up in Sri Lanka. I grew up in Orange County. But there's this expectation that people want you to write about this certain exoticized background in history. And I thought, well, no, I went to high school in Fullerton and, I had all of the normal teen angst that every American child has with an additional candy coating of, these cultural expectations, both from the dominant culture and from home culture. So it's tiring to have these expectations impressed upon you.
In certain communities, as diverse as LA could be, the literary scene could be, sometimes we found ourselves being the only POC writers.
Yeah.
At times.
In the beginning, I found the LA poetry community a little monolithic.
Right.
So being in a workshop with someone who also wrote on the same themes and also was a child of immigrant parents and, had this similar backstory to me, and we're both Asian, and it was a relief, quite frankly.
Right.
To not have to give a lot of backstory of my perspective or why I do things a certain way.
And this is because we met it during Eric Morago's workshop.
Right.
And I think that's how I connected with your writing too. And I really felt as if you were my guide in the workshop.
Hardly. It's a blind leading the blind.
Well, it's a good, some blind people, lead pretty well, I think.
Thank you. I'm going to take it.
We don't want to insulate ourselves from the experiences of the world in general.
Right. We have to live in the world.
Exactly. But at the same time, are there certain perspectives that, I can shorthand to a person who is a POC who will share a similar experience as I do?
Experiences of having been raised by immigrant parents and the expectations and how completely out of the box it is to be a creative when you have Asian parents. That's not what they dream for you necessarily.
And yet at the same time, the way our book came about, we were given these themes that are ekphrastic poems. I would say the larger topic theme, mother, father, sun, moon poems. Mm-hmm. These were something Shannon really gave us a lot of liberty as to what we can come up with.
Right. It was really interesting. We wrote in isolation, we did not collaborate at all, but that the poems are still in conversation is testament to how much consciousness we share from proximity, from friendship, from shared experience.
Is there a poem that you like from our chapbook, which is titled God is a River Running Down My Palm? Is there a poem from there that you'd like to read for us?
I picked a poem that I liked. I mean, I could read a poem you like, but this is one I like. The only thing...
Because they're mutually separate.
So I do
exclusive.
One of the things that I, and as part of being unapologetic of, my cultural identity is I will use singular words in my poems as just part of the language, because that's part of the vocabulary of my life. I'm not gonna suddenly call my mom and and my dad, because I've never called them that in my life, with the exception of a week when I was about 8 or 9 years old, and it just felt so wrong in my mouth, I immediately stopped. But the only thing you need to know in this poem is Ammi means mother, Thati means father, and Malli means younger brother. Thati poses like a dying Gal. In the garden at Versailles, he stretches out in front of the marble reproduction, stifles a smile. He mimics a dying hero, semi-reclined on the crushed stone path. Ammi will label this overcast day in France, her precise handwriting cataloging perfection. A satin Kodak moment tucked into the pocket of a family album. Thati, a young god in maroon windbreaker and bell-bottom jeans. Malli stands behind Thati, his tiny body pressed to a block of stone. A study in concentration, his eyes never leaving his fallen hero. A moment after the photo is snapped, he rushes to Thati's side, checks him for invisible wounds. Ummy's eye composes the moment. What a father can teach a son, the glorious beauty of decay.
It's amazing.
So I've stolen most of our family albums from my childhood because I'm the one in our family who looks at them. And there was a picture from the first trip we took as a family to Europe in 1970 something. And my dad was mimicking one of the statues in the garden at Versailles, and it just really struck me so many years later that when mortality starts to press on you, it seems funny that my dad, who is probably in his 30s, yet much younger than I am now, would make a joke of a dying hero, and like now so many years later, it's so much more poignant to me that this idea of decay and, your mortality presses on you when you see people you love getting older and you yourself feel the press of age.
Really, like it is an ekphrastic poem too at the same time.
It is.
Yeah. I love that.
And and also since our unintended, underpinning of all the poems is desire, it's this desire to be young forever.
Right. To Revere Place, the other book that you have, maybe just like a year before my chapbook
Before
from
your chapbook,
Moontide Press came out.
Press. Yeah, almost exactly a year.
Yeah, it is really like a celebration of like this other world that you had to live in that was considered un-American, right?
Yeah. Yes and no. I mean, considered un-American, I think from a untrained eye or from a certain population.
Yeah.
But it was funny when I started to do research, if you will, on the book. I learned a lot about my family history that I had presumed certain things, and when I sat my parents down and started asking them questions about, well, who are our friends when you first moved here, and this and that, I found out things I never knew about my past and about my parents' past, and it humanized the whole experience so much more for me. But when I decided to write something that was sort of memoir in verse, and I approached my family about the topic, the overwhelming question from them was, why would you want to write a book about us? And my answer was always, why wouldn't I want to write? I think we're interesting. I think other people would think our history is interesting too.
I empathize with that so much because until even my parents, realized that I was writing poems or about directly calling from my own experiences or things that I've heard. Mm-hmm. They had an overwhelming sense of, okay, I think I'm only going to tell my son what I think is important, mm-hmm. which to me was completely uninteresting because it's very much this airbrushed out propaganda sort of family history, Yes. And I was like, no, I know that I need the nitty gritty, I need the gristle, I need the mm-hmm. dirty secrets, I need the gossip, So when that started pouring out, that's when I actually had the material.
Right. There's what they tell you as opposed to what they teach you. And what they teach you is, embedded in all the things that they don't say, which is so interesting. And I think that's universal to parenting. Like your parents tell you, to do this and study hard and whatever messages they give you, but then you see their day-to-day life and the love that they show you isn't in them telling you I love you, it's in going to work every day. And I think this is especially true for children of immigrants. You look at American families or, not first generation families and the extravagance of I love you and the extravagance of positive regard and affirmation. And on the one hand, you yearn for it. But then when you look back at your family history, you think love was in every plate of food they put down in front of you and, every book in your book bag. And,
In Korea, we have this record of your lineage, so you can trace your family back, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure how accurate it is, but it is supposed to come to me because I'm like one of the only, people that's still living of like, my family's generation that's like interested in stuff like that. So it like traces just like people back for their last names, but it's very airbrushed, right? Like, it's very much about like, oh, you have like a nobility in your blood. I'm like, that's not what I care about. Like, what I care about is like the little moments, right?
Right.
And I think that's what poem does in terms of like it's recording life that would have just completely left out of something that's like trying to instill in you like a sense of legacy or something.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
But I think as we age, our idea of legacy goes from this grandiose idea to inheriting important things to like the legacy of hard work or the legacy of how intrepid our parents were to leave everything they knew and come to a place where they'd be fighting uphill most of their lives just based on their country of origin or their native tongue, if you will. But that's the legacy I think that we both carry in us is this intrepid spirit of like speaking our own realities despite living in the face of a dominant culture that would have you think you're less than.
I also, on the same token, didn't think that I was excluded from anywhere. So like I have like this weird like
entitlement to be aware.
Exactly. It's not even entitlement. It's like it's almost like an ignorant bliss. It's because like, well, I never really sought membership anywhere.
Right.
So why would I be denied membership anywhere? Like I'm like
you're not used to being denied.
Yeah, I was like, what am I being denied from? Like I didn't apply in the first place. Like what are you talking about?
Right. Is it the Groucho Marx line? Like right. I wouldn't be part of a club that would have me as a member.
Yeah, exactly. So when they're like, oh, you don't belong here, like I didn't want to belong. Like
Right. But it's interesting and it kind of ties to the exoticization of people who aren't, Anglo-American or Euro-American. When people say like, oh, your name is so exotic, I think, well, South Asians are like close to 2 billion worldwide. Like if anything, I'm typical. I would think someone from Finland is really exotic because there are very few. Yeah. But South Asians are, the world is chock-a-block with South Asians. So when people come at me with this like, oh, what an exotic name and this and that, I think I don't really understand your definition of exotic in that I'm much more typical. Like the only way I could be more typical is if I was Chinese.
Chinese people, 1 billion, just Chinese, right? So mathematically, the whole definition of what we call minority just never made sense to me.
Right.
It's like a very non-global term. It's a very like endemic term. To actually be like, okay, well, majority by definition should be more than 50%. That's what majority should mean.
Right.
So minority means anybody who's less than
50%. Yeah.
So like when I came here, when I actually started hearing these like very politicized mathematical terms, appropriated mathematical terms, it really and by meaning like came here, I mean it's like after I was born here. I grew up in Korea and then came back here.
Sure.
It boggled my mind because I felt like, it's like, here's a definition of a word that you were taught and how blatantly it was being used in a context that went against the definition.
When I was growing up in New York, everyone I knew was either Italian, Irish Catholic, or Jewish. And so I thought Judaism was the world's biggest religion because everyone I knew in my small world was either Catholic or Jewish, and those must have been the two big religions. And one of my friend's moms asked me like what faith we were because it was during the holiday season, and I said, "Oh, we're in a religion that no one's ever heard of. It's really small." And I don't know what she thought I was going to come out Zoroastrian or something. And when I told her we were Buddhist, she thought this was hilarious because, like, Buddhism is a giant religion, and we're with membership in every corner of the globe. But like in my child's mind, I thought, well, the reality I see in our small town must be what America's like or what the world is like. Like, there's only a handful of Sri Lankans or only a handful of South Asians in our small town, if any, besides our nuclear family. And then you grow up and you travel and you feel like, wow, there's millions of us, billions of us.
And in some ways, that's what's beautiful about, like, I think, poetry and American poetry. There's still a lot of people who are living these pockets, you know, and
Right.
I'm not necessarily just talking about racial minority poems. I mean, people who are, like, you know, in like a small town could really be living like a life that I'm very interested in, but
Right.
you know, like in their microcosm, like you said,
Right.
would never have thought that that's not a typical life outside, right? Like, and that's, I think, what poetry draws me. Like, currently, what the poetry landscape draws me. You know, it's those kinds of experiences, and like all of those like different experiences.
It's
that
a
are
great way to
coexisting.
steal lives. Like
Right.
you know, you can pick up a poetry book from someone who lives a life very like in Appalachia, for example, like very remote from anything I know. Yeah, this is
Yeah.
why we read. I mean, you
Yeah.
read to feel less alone, and you know, read somebody's, you know, story about whatever it is, fixing a meal or, you know, seeing a bird flying in the sky, and you think, well, okay, I share that sky with you, and you know, I buy tomatoes like that, or and you find these commonalities, and it makes you feel less isolated and a little less special, but in a good way.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to now read a poem that was on the same theme as a poem you read about your father. Dementia asked if he had a son. Mother claims you have dementia and it feels like a cheap shot. Your thoughts never started anywhere and never ended, like the clutches of an undertow. You talked naturally demented your whole life. Natural? What does that even mean? When I loved the cartoon devil at 6, I asked you to draw his vengeance naked, the thing that made him so sure of life. And without hesitation, you gave me a pencil sketch of the devil undressed. This is what you see, but do not believe in it. You never did talk to me like a child, a man who stood like a tower, a one day grow enough legs to scale, a man who thought all men should be feminists in the 70s. You knew you couldn't lose when already lost. Birthdays, matching shoes with belts, even remembering the way back from the grocery store doesn't excite you, much to mother's chagrin. For only in losing everything will pain relent. We'll find and forget the devil within us, so cold, so alive.
Yeah, you get to a certain age, and your parents become a much more sympathetic character in your story. Like rather than being this authoritarian God figure, they've become so painfully human that it's, you know, you just realize that you can forgive them all of, you know, all of the things that you blame them for your whole life because they're suddenly people.
And they become less of a parent in a way.
Yeah.
Because they become characters in your poems. And when you're like exploring them in a way that you do any character, they really start to lose this hold on you almost as like a parent figure.
And they just become like this friend
Human.
that you
Right.
suddenly feel painfully empathetic towards. Yeah.
May I ask you to read one poem from To Revere, please?
Sure, the one that we discussed.
Yes.
Okay. So I think it's a good close to, you know, how you come full circle in your life and realize what's lost, it's always found. The things left. You think that you left things behind, forgotten in the coat closet at To Revere Place, tucked in the back behind the winter coats and ice skates, or left behind in the garage, leaning against the wall closest to Ummy's orange AMC Hornet, the one with AM radio only, songs that drifted out the speakers, songs from the Grease soundtrack, hopelessly devoted to you and You're the One That I Want, acting out scenes from the movie, the neighborhood kids taking turns at Danny and Sandy and Rizzo, Oh, those other songs left in the cabinet of the big black console stereo crouching in the basement. Echoes of the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack electric sliding up the stairs and into the kitchen where Thothy is blowing up more balloons that he rubs against his curly hair to generate the static that sticks them to the wall. And on Monday morning, there will still be crepe paper streamers left, scotch taped to the wood paneling. Still crumpled wrapping paper left on the floor, exposed gifts of Monopoly and Connect Four piled on the folding table, and leftover birthday cake sweating sugar onto a Pyrex dish in the kitchen fridge, the pink roses bleeding into the white frosting, ballerina candles blown out, tilting arabesques next to your icing name, left waiting for you to eat, like you eat the dogwood trees, pink and red in the front yard of 2 Revere Place. Eat the Tuscan jeans, stiff and impossibly indigo, eat the purple banana seat bike whizzing down Howard Avenue, eat the 17-year cicadas and the baseball cards, and the last half-ounce of Ummy's bluegrass eau de toilette. You've eaten all these things because we grew up in a home where nothing ever goes to waste, nothing left behind on the plate.
Well, it's always a pleasure.
Yeah, we just
talking
time
to
loses
you.
all,
I know.
all meaning.
I mean, sometimes I just thought that this was going to be a wonderful idea to begin with, but I think part of my worry was that, okay, what if this becomes very self-indulgent? Like it's just like us talking for like 3 hours and like.
But how can you wonder that when it's always the case?
Right.
It's always the case. And then our conversations just meander.
Right.
And yeah, I just completely lose track of the hour every single time.
Well, I love you and thank you for coming.
I love you.
Thank you
and
for coming to the Poetry.LA Cafe.
And it's, Mutual Admiration Society, party of 2, your table is now ready.